Okay, let's not confuse them with ACOGs, but they're still very good at what they do. Hey, what's up fellas? Welcome back to the channel. It's Paul again, and today we're talking about the full spectrum optic again. So what I mean by that is you're looking for something that is, you can shoot short range targets and long range targets. Do you think an LPVO is still the right choice? Well, as you guys have seen on the channel, we shot LPVOs a bunch in a lot of different situations. And for us, I think an LPVO makes sense for most users. But apparently while we were out doing all that shooting, I found out from old man Facebook that LPVOs are actually over. Like the L in the LPVO actually stands for lame now. So if you definitely don't want to be lame and you want to be cool with your buddies again, apparently you need to go with something like this, a lighter, more compact setup than an LPVO. So what I'm going to call this a dual power optic, or the DPO for short. So staccato, don't sue me. And we've already seen like one iteration of this in a previous video with our ACOG ECOS video. I'll link to it, you haven't already seen it. So in that video, if you notice, it is a fixed power magnified optic plus a 1x dot, either a piggyback or offset configuration. So just as a reminder on the channel, we tend to look at how optics perform in practical shooting scenarios. So we want to look past the hype and the marketing and then find out what the real dope on these optics are. So that's the same approach we're going to take now, but except we're going to do it for the non-ACOG budgets out there. And what we're looking at today is the Primary Arms 3 and 5X micro prisms, which for full disclosure, Primary Arms was gracious enough to send this in for a review. So we're going to take a close look at these optics right now and find out the real dope on them. So if you're moving away from LPVOs, chances are you're doing it because of size and weight. And because these prisms are fixed magnification devices, so there's less glass involved, I think you're gonna be happy with your choice if that's your main criteria. So we're talking footprint and size. The 5X is only half an inch longer than the 3X. And if you put it up like against a Trijicon ACOG 4X, it's almost half as short. So if you're looking to maximize rail space, the 5X is what you want to look at. And that goes for the weight as well. So I think the 5X is only about half an ounce more than 3X, while the ACOG comes in about 10 ounces or so. And if you were to throw a piggyback mount on this, even with the red dot, you could throw this combo on a weight scale and it would still come in lighter than the lightest LPVO out there. Okay, so since we're talking weight, let's talk about mounting options. So if you look at the manual, it's super confusing. It's really cluttered because there's just a one page and to let you know, hey, these are all the different mounting options. So I'm just gonna simplify for you. In my opinion, there really are only two good mounting options. Okay, so the first one to consider is the low mount or the no spacer mount. So if you have an AK or shotgun where the stock is below the action, then you want that mount to get the optic as low as possible. So when you bring it to your eye, it will align with the sight. And the second mount to consider, if you have an AR type rifle, so you have the action in line with the buffer, is the mount that it comes with. It can't deliver a medium spacer. So this mount height-wise is the same as a scope mount, a standard scope mount of 1.5. So I think it's the right compromise as far as the sight height and cantilever. One thing is you will want to use a cantilever mount instead of a straight mount just because of the eye relief, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Now in the manual, there's a 2.0 inch high mount on there. I would not recommend that, but that is available if for some reason your cheekbones are really large and you want a more heads up shooting position, you can use that. Just remember that when it gets that high, when you do your ballistics calculator, remember to put in the height of bore at 4 inches or higher, as it will affect your far zero and your max ordinate when you're talking bullet trajectory, okay? One last thing about those mounts is no matter which one you choose, be sure you torque it properly to the correct inch pounds. And the reason why I say that is the manual is wrong, or the ones that were shipped anyway. The inch pounds that are listed there are way too high. So if you try to torque them to that value, you'll probably break your screws. So the revised ones I found online, so I'll just put them here. So just use those values instead. Okay, so now we're done with talking profiles. We're still talking externals. Let's take a quick look at the controls. All right guys, so as far as controls, we'll take a look at the adjustment turrets first. I really like this design. So it's ultra low profile, so it fits flush with the optic. So it's not going to move if you get snagged on it or anything like that. Having said that, you will need a tool in order to make the adjustments. So when you're moving them in between clicks, you'll get some tactile feedback. They're actually moving. Additionally, it is marked at a 0.25 MOA per click. So it's more than precise enough to get a really good zero. And on the back, you'll find the one thing that ACOGs don't have, which is a diopter for tuning in the reticle to your vision. So it's pretty fair to say, hey, if you're over 40 years old, like me, you should probably not get an ACOG because you're going to be wondering why the ACOG reticles are so blurry. So the only note I want to make about the way primary arms did the adapter is there's no witness mark on here. So if they do move, you won't really see where it moved to. And the second thing is when I first got it, when you turn it, it's pretty stiff to move. So when you get yours, just keep turning it and it will gradually loosen up. And lastly, on the left-hand side, this is where you'll find the illumination knob. There are 13 settings here. Yeah, 13 settings with the first 3 being night vision. And every time you turn it in between them, you'll get really good feedback and a click. In the previous 1X Cyclops, it was really soft and mushy, so you couldn't tell. And one other thing I'll note here is there is no off position in between, so you do have to spin it all the way to 0 to turn it off. However, both the 3X and the 5X Prisms are the newer optics, so they come with Primary Arms Auto Live technology, which you saw in a previous video. And what that does is if you forget to turn this off, after 2 minutes or so, the reticle illumination will turn off by itself. And when you pick the gun up, it will re-illuminate. So that will help save battery as well. Okay, so now we've finished talking externals. Let's zoom in and talk internals, and we'll look at glass performance. All right, fellas, just as a reminder, PA divides up their glass into 3 different tiers of quality. You got the budget line, which is the SLX straight out of their Chinese factory. Then you got the mid-tier out of the Philippines with their GLX line. And then you have the top of the line Japanese glass, which is their PLX Platinum line. So all their prisms so far are SLX glass, so it is their budget line. However, having said that, as you guys know, we recently looked at the Nova 1-6, which also has SLX glass. And from that review, and from my experience just looking at the glass, it's really hard to tell the difference now between their budget and the mid-tier because the gap has narrowed significantly. Having said that, if you compare the SLX Prism glass versus the Nova 1-6 SLX glass, you can tell that the Nova glass is a little bit clearer, especially on the edges, more crisp with better contrast in color. However, I will say that if you were to stack the 3 and the 5 side by side, the 5X does have a little bit more discoloration and distortion around their outer edge. It's not too bad since the center is clear, but the distortion is there. But that's definitely not to say that the SLX glass that's in the Prism is bad, because when I look through it, it's actually more than good enough. It's actually quite good for both the 3 and the 5. And along that same line, if you were to compare the SLX glass against the ACOG glass, well, ACOG glass is quite a bit nicer. It's clearer. It's definitely brighter because it's got a larger objective. But coming back to the glass that's already in the Prism, at pretty much at all ranges that you're going to be using this, the glass is more than good enough. So basically, if you're used to like Vortex PST glass, I would probably say that's very similar to what you see here in the Prism. So speaking of that ACOG we mentioned earlier, as you guys know, for those standard size ACOGs, the eye relief is like the biggest detriment on those. So you basically gotta like molest the ocular with your eyeball in order to see the full sight picture. Well, for these Prisms, that's not an issue. Eye relief on both the 3 and the 5 is 2.7 inches, and it's definitely comfortable to where you can get behind it. Hey, I have a good sight picture, but I will say it's not LPVO comfortable. So if you put your head on the stock, if you're used to LPVOs, you're gonna have to move your head up just a little bit in order to get a sight picture. Just remember that 2.7 is really close to 2.5 inches eye relief. And you know what else has that eye relief? Magnifier. So you're used to using a magnifier, then just back off a little bit. That's what using this Prism is like. And you're gonna know you're at the right eye relief when you push in, you kind of clear that left side of the Prism because you see that shadow on the left side clear. So while we're talking about that, just as far as the side-to-side tolerance for an eye box, you're gonna have a bigger eye box on the 3X than the 5X because the extra pupil is bigger on a 3X because the magnification is lower. Having said that, I think the extra pupil and the side-to-side tolerance on the 5X is not real tight. So for the 5X, I think if you mount it correctly, I don't think you have any issues getting a good sight picture with this 5X at all. And just a quick note about illumination. So illumination on the 3 and the 5X are not as important as they were on the 1X Cyclops because, hey, we're not shooting 3 or 5X generally as short range targets. So we're using our red dot for that, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And just to tell you the difference between illumination, the 3X is brighter than the 5X, and the 3X illuminates the entire reticle where the 5X just does the center reticle. Okay, so let's talk about those red dots. So because they're fixed magnification optics, you really can't use them for speed up close. Can shoot it a little bit, the 3X a little bit, occluded speed, and that's okay. But really, you want to use red dot for that. In order to do that, PA gives you 2 options, right? They give you the piggyback, or what they call the 12 o'clock option, or you can put your red dot on an offset, or what I call the 45-degree mount. Now there's pluses and minuses to each of those mounts, so just real quickly, so if you're using the piggyback mount, because it's a little bit higher, a lot of people will use passive nods with this type of mount, and also it's in line with the optics, so you can use for strong and sport size shoulder if you're doing a lot of that. Additionally, it's not hanging off the side of the gun. But for the offset mount, which a lot of 3-gunners know, The offset mount, the biggest advantage there is speed and stability because your cheek weld stays the same. Just rotate the gun and now you can shoot along the axis of the gun. Versus the piggyback mount, which you have to raise your face and use a chin weld instead of cheek weld, so it's not as strong on the support, so you can't shoot it as fast. And just a real quick note of how you're using this kind of DPO setup. Just remember in the LPVO, you're using the LPVO at 1x most of the time, at 80% of the time. Very similar to a red dot magnifier setup. So you'll spin it up only when you need to engage medium targets. In this example, it's almost the reverse where you're using it, you're shooting at a long range target with your primary, and if you see a short range target you need to engage, just go to your red dot or you go to your offset, right? So you can test those performance differences because I think it's important to do that between those different types of setups. So just set up a target at 50 yards or so and set up a couple of close range targets at 10 yards and start with long and then transition to short so you can see how they differ. So as you can see, there is quite a bit of difference when you're choosing between the setups, and also I included LPVO in there because if you're choosing to go to LPVO, just know that you can run LPVO without an offset red dot. If you shoot it occluded, and you only lose a little bit of time. All right, finally, I do want to make a note about durability. So these mounts are cheap. You look on the site, they're only like $30 or so. I don't know if this makes them more inherently fragile than more expensive options, but I think like if you guys saw that Brass Facts video, I think he brought up maybe a weakness in the mount. So if you were to not even mess with these mounts and actually just look at them, you can kind of see how the piggyback mount, just from its design where it's hooked at the bottom, it kind of protrudes out the front here. If you were to drop this optic and have it land on his head, it might break. I do want to make one general note about optics durability testing, especially from randos like me on the internet. It is sort of anecdotal, meaning that if I do something, I break this mount, does that mean that you're gonna have that problem with your mount? Maybe, maybe not. Only reason why I say that is just the data set's too small, right? So anything we do here, statistically, it's gonna be hard to draw a conclusion. Having said that, I think what Brass Fact uncovered, I think is worthy of testing yourself as well. So let me offer you my experiences when I've tested both these mounts. First thing I want to mention is after watching Brass Facts video, I did take this piggyback mount, zero at 50, and then bang it up against a VTEC barricade and looked at the zero shift again. And I saw very little movement, at least for my testing, of just like coincidental banging. So you're running on a stage and you happen to hit your gun against something. I don't think that's enough. But I wanted to take it a little bit a step further. I want to do a drop test from waist high. And here's what I uncovered. First, starting with the offset mount, which is a 3X and the offset with his primary arms RS10. I shot a group at 50 and I shot a group 100. And then, so after that, I shot another group at 50 and 100. And what I saw is both on the offset and the 3X Prism, I saw maybe 1.5 to 2 MOA shift. To me, I think that's rather acceptable for a drop from that height. Okay, so the second test I did was with this combo, which is a 5X and the RS10 on the piggyback mount. So again, shot a group of 50, then shot a group 100 with the 5X Prism. And then, so this time I checked the group with the 5X Prism, saw a little bit of movement, about the same, about 1.5, 2 MOA, so within acceptable. However, when I checked the 50-yard group with RS10, I was off paper. So I wasn't even hitting the target. I checked the mount, shook it around, made sure like none of the screws came loose, and it was fine. But when I took a look at the mount sideways and side profile, I noticed that the piggyback mount was a little bit bent. You can probably see it in some of the close-ups. Knowing that, it's probably shooting way high, right, because of that. So any conclusions here? Well, for sure, it looks like, hey, if you want a drop test durable mount, I think that the piggyback is not the mount for you because as you can see, it kind of sticks out far in front of the main optic. And if you drop it on its head, it's probably going to run into that problem, right? The second conclusion is the 3X mount on this side is actually pretty durable, right? So it went through the same thing and it really only shifted as much as the other conclusion is the 3X and 5X Prisms stay within their acceptable zone of movement. I think that as far as durability, the Prisms and the offset are good. The piggyback, you know, I wouldn't trust it if I were to drop it or bang it really hard against something. All right, fellas, so we talked shooting up close quite a bit now and glass performance, so we're gonna zoom out and talk long range now. Okay, so the 3X comes with the ACSS Raptor reticle, which is a circle chevron reticle, and it has bullet drops out to 600 yards. Well, at least according to the manual. But what I found is when you're using optics with less than 3 power magnification and you're shooting at practical size targets like 6-inch to 10-inch steel, with 3X, it's really hard to see the drops just because the target and the magnification isn't large enough for you to align the hashes on the BDC. So if you look at the test footage, can you easily see the drops on this picture? However, this reticle does include some options that more expensive scopes have, which is really nice. So it does have auto ranging stadia lines as far as the 18-inch shoulder width, just like the ACOG does, and also has wind holds, 5 and 10 mile an hour wind holds out to 600 yards. It's going to be really hard to shoot out that far. And it does have left and right moving target indicators if you use that big ring as far as your left and right holds. So Strelic does have this reticle listed in our database, so if you were to shoot with this out to that far, make sure you can select that from the list of available reticles.
100, good one. 335, bottom chevron. Hit. 420, probably the second line.
So for the 5X, it comes with the ACSS Aurora reticle, and in that reticle, which is also available in the 1-6 Nova, by the way, is a much better reticle for shooting long range, in my opinion. So just to be clear, there are 2 Aurora reticles available for this optic, the BDC version and the MIL version. In this video, I'm using the BDC version, although personally I would choose the MIL version since it's a little bit more universal and the drops are easier to figure out. Only the center chevron is illuminated, so I think that's a much better design than the full reticle illumination that you have on the 3X, so it's a lot cleaner and not as distracting. And additionally, it does have ranging stadia to the left and right of the center reticle, and it's pushed far enough away so it leaves the center reticle a lot more clear so you can easily spot and track misses and slave to targets. Strelic does not have this reticle, so I contacted the primary arms about getting subtensions, and it looks like they're not making the subtensions public anymore, so the chances of Strelic having this reticle in the future is probably slim. But just checking the available reticles, it looks like the Gen 3 ladder drops from the older primary arms 1-6 is similar to this BDC reticle, even though it's missing the 50-yard increments. Hopefully the subtensions are the same. So use that as your starting mark and then shoot and confirm those drops at those distances.
100. Hit. So that's 237. Hit. 300, probably right before. Hit. 425, probably right here at the 5. Hit.
All right, fellas, we're back at the beginning again. So just as far as final thoughts on this, as far as pricing on these, you can see that they're substantially cheaper than they're comparable like a Trijicon ACOG or so. So let's go back to something I mentioned during the glass performance. And let me ask you this question. Out of these 2 sights, which one is your primary? I think the primary optic on this is really the Prism, right? So if the Prism is the primary and this is the secondary, if you really think about it, well, that means that you're primarily going to be shooting long range with just a little bit of short range in between, right? And if that's the scenario, then we really think about what an LPVO and red dot magnifier does. It's the reverse of that. Going back to the beginning when we talked about, hey, we're replacing an LPVO, we're kind of not replacing it, we're just replacing our use case and our requirements. We're flipping them around. So knowing that, rather than, hey, I'm gonna get an optic and then find a use case for my shooting, just take a look at your shooting and say, hey, does this match what I'm doing here? I'm gonna be shooting primarily out of this and then with a few targets in between out of this. If that matches, then I think this Prism, this DPO setup is the right one for you. So that's all I got for today, fellas. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you did, please leave a like and comment so this small channel can keep growing. And as always, check the description and comments if you're interested in this equipment. Thanks again for joining us, and I'll see you guys again next time.